The first time Eli Mercer saw the girl, she was standing so straight beside the saloon stove you could have mistaken pride for warmth, though her dress hem was wet with slush and her knuckles were blue from cold. Her father leaned on the bar with a bottle already empty in one hand and a second one in his eyes, the kind of look a man gets when he has decided something ugly and wants the room to help him believe it is ordinary. I said she works hard, Virgil Bell slurred, shoving the child forward by the shoulder. Don't eat much neither. The room smelled of rye, wet wool, lamp oil, and the old sourness of men who had stopped caring what became of them. The girl did not cry. She only lifted her chin and said, before anyone could touch her, I can carry my own satchel. That was what caught Eli, not the drunken bargain, not the laugh that rolled from one end of the bar to the other. It was that one line, spoken with a split lip and a child's voice worn thin from being older than it ought to be. Before we go further, settle in wherever you are tonight, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We like knowing who's by the fire with us before a story opens all the way. Then Virgil slapped the bar and named his price. 1 bottle, he said. Not the cheap stuff. Silence fell hard enough to hear the stove iron ping. The saloon keeper, Bender, wiped his hands on a rag and looked away first. A cattle buyer near the wall made a sound through his nose that might have been disgust or amusement or simply habit. Nobody moved. Nobody wanted the weight of that moment on them. Eli took off his gloves one finger at a time. He had come in for coffee, lamp wicks, and a sack of oats. He was a man folks knew for buying what he needed and saying little beyond it. Tall without show about it. Shoulders gone a touch heavy with winter and work. A scar rode pale along his jaw where a horse had thrown him against a gatepost years before. Men mistook his quiet for softness until they tried leaning on it. He set a silver dollar on the bar. Pour him the bottle, Eli said. Virgil grinned, all ruin and gums. There now? Told you she was worth something. Eli's eyes never left the girl. I didn't say she was for sale. I said pour him the bottle. Virgil's grin thinned. You think $1 buys charity? No, Eli said. I think it buys time. The girl looked at him then. Really looked. Her eyes were dark and watchful and old in a way that made something tighten low and mean in his chest. He had seen that same age once in the mirror after he buried his wife and the child who had only lived long enough to be named. Virgil reached for the bottle the moment Bender slid it over, but Eli took it first and set it farther down the bar. Paper, Eli said. What paper? The kind that says a man's too deep in liquor to know shame from business. Bender swallowed. Eli. Paper. Virgil laughed again, but there was less of it now. You got no call to interfere. Eli finally turned toward him. You're right. I've got a choice. The girl still had not moved. Her satchel lay by the stove, patched so many times it looked more seam than leather. One shoe had a piece of cord where a buckle ought to be. There was dried blood at the cuff of her sleeve. Virgil reached for her arm. She flinched before his hand landed. That settled the rest of it. Eli put another coin down. Write your name. By the time Virgil Bell, grinning and swaying, scratched his mark across Bender's freight receipt, the whole room had gone quiet enough to hear sleep ticking at the window. Eli folded the paper once, set the unopened bottle in Virgil's hand, then picked up the girl's satchel. She did not thank him. She did not ask where they were going. She only said, If you mean to put me to scrubbing, I can do that. If you mean to hit me, I'd rather know beforehand. A man at the far table muttered, Jesus. Eli took a long breath that burned all the way down. I don't mean either. Virgil had already tugged the cork free with his teeth. Take her then, he called, not looking up. She's mule-headed. Talks back. Eats more than she's worth. The girl's face changed then, but only a little. Not grief. Not surprise. Just the small, terrible stillness of someone hearing the final proof of what she had already known. Eli held the door open. Wind came in sharp as broken glass. Come on. She bent, picked up her own satchel from his hand instead of letting him carry it, and walked out into the storm like she had decided the cold was preferable to being watched. Outside, dusk had laid a blue skin over the whole town. Hitch rails creaked. A dog barked once and thought better of it. Eli's gelding stamped beside the wagon, steam rising off its neck. The girl climbed in without being told. That unsettled him more than tears might have. He snapped the reins, and the wagon rolled out through churned mud gone silver with sleet. For a long while there was only the rattle of harness, the leather groan of the seat, and the hard little sound of her breathing through a stuffed nose. Finally he said, "What's your name?" She hesitated as if the answer might carry risk. "Cora." "How old are you, Cora?" "9." He looked over. 9. Near enough 10 if it helps. Against his will, something almost like a smile tugged at one corner of his mouth. "It doesn't." She sat with both hands around the satchel in her lap. "If you're taking me back in the morning, don't. He'll just do it again. The wagon will drop into a rut." Eli steadied the horse. "I haven't said I'm taking you back. You haven't said you ain't." He had no answer ready for that. The road out to Mercer Bend ran along a shallow creek half skinned over with ice. Cottonwoods stood black against the last light. Somewhere off in the dark a coyote called, thin and hungry. Eli owned 160 rough acres, a weathered house, a barn that always needed one more board, and a herd not large enough to impress anyone but large enough to keep him alive if the winter stayed honest. He had no sisters, no mother, no waiting wife, no practice at gentleness with children. The nearest thing to a plan in his head was an orphan home down in Cheyenne, and the dim hope that decent women there might do better by a girl than the world already had. But when he pulled up outside his house and looked over, Cora was staring at the lamp in the kitchen window with the expression of someone trying not to want a thing too much. Inside, she stopped just over the threshold and went very still. Warmth hit them first, then the smell of coffee gone strong on the back of the stove, cedar smoke, saddle soap, while drying by the hearth. She was listening, measuring the house by its silences. "No one else lives here?" she asked. "No." That seemed to puzzle her more than anything yet. He set down the oats, lit another lamp, and pointed toward the basin stand. "Wash if you want. There's stew. I can wait." It wasn't an invitation to beg. Something flashed in her face then. Pride again, wounded and stubborn. She crossed to the basin, rolling up her sleeves. The water pinked around her wrists where the skin was chafed raw. Eli ladled stew into a bowl and set it at the table. She sat but did not touch it until he took a bite from his own. After that, she ate fast and quiet and clean, as if she had learned not to trust any meal that lasted too long. When she was done, she tucked the spoon exactly beside the bowl. "You sleep there," he said, nodding toward the small room off the kitchen. It had once been meant for a child. He kept tools in it now, or had, until the week before. She looked up sharply. "You got a lock?" "No." "You should." Before he could ask what that meant, she rose, carrying her satchel like a shield. At the door she paused. "Why'd you do it?" she asked. He could have lied. Could have said obligation, decency, anger, chance. All of them were true enough and not the thing itself. Instead he said, "Because a child is not a bottle." She stared at him, searching for mockery and not finding it. Then she went into the little room and shut the door. Eli sat by the stove after the house had gone still. Wind worried the eaves. Somewhere in the barn a horse knocked its hoof against wood. At last he reached into his coat, took out the freight receipt with Virgil Bell's drunken mark on it, and held it over the flame until the corner caught. He let it burn all the way to ash in the stove pan. That was the point of no return, though he would not have called it that then. He only knew that by the time the paper curled black and vanished, the girl asleep in the next room was no longer something he had purchased from a worse man than himself. She was a life in his keeping, and nothing in his house would be the same again. Cora stayed because morning came and Eli did not hitch the wagon south. Then a week passed. Then two. At first she moved through the house like a tenant in her own fear. She slept with her boots on, flinched at laughter, cleared every plate the moment a meal ended, as though delay might be mistaken for laziness, and paid for bodily. If Eli reached past her too quickly for a cup or towel, she stiffened all the way to the spine. He learned to speak before entering a room, learned to set things within reach instead of handing them to her sudden, learned that she hated whiskey on a man's breath and thunder after dark and the sound of a belt pulled fast through loops. She learned he rose before light, muttered at fences as if they had chosen their own condition, and spoke to horses in the same plain tone he used with people. One morning a young roan mare came in half wild from a broken gate, eyes rimmed white, foam on the bitless mouth. Cora was carrying kindling across the yard when the mare reared against the rail. Any child with sense would have run. Cora set down the wood, walked straight to the fence, and began speaking so low Eli could not catch the words. Nothing special in them, maybe. The sense of them was not the point. Her voice moved steady as creek water over stone. The mare's ears flicked. Her head came down a fraction. Another. By the time Eli reached the rail, Cora had laid one small hand against the horse's neck. "You got no call to scare yourself to death," she told the animal. "Ain't nobody here needing to win against you." The mare shuddered once, then stilled. Eli watched her over the fence. "Where'd you learn that?" Cora kept her hand where it was. "From not liking how scared things look." It might have been the truest sentence spoken on that ranch in years. Town had its say, as towns do. Mrs. Peavy at the general store pursed her lips over bolts of calico and said it was not fitting for a lone man to keep a girl not his kin. Reverend Sykes recommended a mission home. The blacksmith's wife left 2 jars of preserves at Eli's porch without comment, which in that county counted as open support. Nora Vickers, the schoolteacher, came out one Saturday with a bundle of readers under her arm and a look that suggested she did not ask permission from men unless she found the experiment amusing. Nora was 30 if a day, widowed young, with gray eyes and a habit of pinning people in place by simply listening until they grew embarrassed and told the truth. "You can send her away," Nora said after supper while Cora sounded out words near the lamp. "But if you do it because other people are weak in their thinking, that weakness will still be theirs when the wagon leaves." Eli stood at the sink, drying a tin plate. "You saying I ought to keep her?" "I'm saying children aren't sacks of feed to be transferred where gossip says they fit best." Cora's mouth hovered open over a word she could not decide how to attack. Nora knelt beside her chair and tapped the page. "There. Start with the first sound and trust the rest to come." Cora looked up. "What if it don't?" Nora smiled a little. "Then we try again. That is how decent things are built." Later, when Nora had gone and the wind-pressed cedar smoked down across the house, so the whole place smelled like winter and memory, Eli found Cora standing by the little room doorway. "You fixing to send me away?" she asked. He had thought he was sparing her the matter by keeping silent. That was his mistake. Children raised around danger hear decisions before they are spoken. "There's a home in Cheyenne," he said. "Women there. School. Other children. Do they want me?" The question landed harder than if she had cried. He told the truth. "I don't know." She nodded once, like a person adding a number she dislikes but expected. "All right." That night, Eli lay awake listening to the house settle. Snow hissed across the roof. He saw again the tiny grave on the ridge behind his barn, where his wife Lena and the daughter he had never held warm were buried side by side under the same wind-bent cedar. He had been 12 hours late getting back from Rollins with the doctor. 12 hours. Men told him it was weather, distance, bad luck. None of that altered what had happened under his roof, while he was elsewhere making good sense in poor time. In the morning, he harnessed the wagon. Cora climbed in carrying the same satchel she had arrived with. She did not ask where they were bound. That made him feel meaner than if she had begged. They reached town by noon. Outside the church hall stood a line of children with travel tags pinned to their coats, waiting on some eastbound arrangement made by people who thought distance and scripture could heal any wound. One little boy had both hands shoved under his armpits for warmth. A girl older than Cora kept staring at the road as if expecting someone already late. Cora saw them. She said nothing, but her hands tightened on the satchel until the leather creaked. Eli reined in. The horse breathed steam. The church bell began to ring somewhere beyond the cottonwoods. A man could tell himself he was being practical, responsible, sensible, but there are moments when sense is only fear wearing a clean collar. He turned the wagon around. Cora looked at him, not trusting what had happened. "We're going home," he said. She did not answer until they were clear of town. "Why?" "Because I've buried enough things by doing the reasonable thing too slowly." She watched his face a long time. "I don't understand." "You don't have to." By dusk the story had outrun them home. Tom Meares, Eli's oldest hand, was waiting by the corral, hat shoved back, beard white with frost. "Heard you was dropping the girl at the mission," Tom said. "Changed my mind." Tom spat into the snow and nodded once. "Good." That was all. Tom had the habit of saying exactly enough and never a grain more. In the weeks that followed, Cora began to unfold by degrees, so small you could only measure them by what no longer frightened her. She laughed once when a hen flew at Eli's head over a nest. She sang under her breath while shelling beans, then stopped dead when she realized he could hear. She started calling the roan mare Juniper and taught her to come to a whistle no one else could make. One evening by the fire, Nora Vickers watched Cora reading from a primer and said, almost idly. A thing ain't worthless because the wrong fool priced it cheap. Cora looked up slowly. Eli, mending tack near the hearth, kept his eyes on the leather because suddenly they stung. Years move the way water does, patient until you realize the bank has changed. By 17, Cora could throw a loop clean from a running horse, doctor a calf, argue feed figures with any man in the county, and calm the meanest gelding in the Mercer string by laying 2 fingers against its jaw and waiting out its panic. She had her mother's dark eyes, though she remembered her mother only as a smell of flour and lye soap and one song sung low by lamplight. She had Eli's steadiness by adoption, if not by blood. Folks stopped saying the Bell Girl and started saying Mercer's Cora, which pleased Eli more than it ought to have and frightened him some too, because wanting things had once cost him dearly. Then the drought bit down. Grass went yellow early. Creek beds narrowed. Men who had never borrowed began discussing notes and terms in voices like apologies. Harlan Pike rode in from the north with money enough to make poor seasons look like opportunity. He owned 3 spread-out ranches, a bank share in town, and the kind of smile a snake would wear if the Lord had given it teeth fit for conversation. He began buying up land around Mercer Bend by springtime. "Your lower pasture interests me," Pike told Eli one afternoon, dismounting at the yard as if the place already belonged to him. His gloves were too fine for real work, his coat collar trimmed with beaver, his horse imported and aware of it. "It shouldn't," Eli said. Pike's gaze slid to Cora in the corral, gentling a blue-black colt that had thrown 2 hands already. "You've got one good water source in the district. Men make themselves sentimental about springs. Men who don't own them, mostly." Pike smiled. "I admire plain talk." Cora walked the colt in a narrowing circle, voice low, hand steady at the lead. Pike watched her the way speculators watch riverbanks. "Is that the Bell Girl?" he asked. Eli's shoulders went still. "That's Cora." "Oh." Pike put the sound away like a thought worth saving. "Well, drought has a way of sorting the stubborn from the ruined. If you change your mind, my offer stands." He rode off without dust because there was not enough left on the ground to lift. 3 days later, Tom came in from town with news. "Virgil Bell's back," he said at supper. The spoon slipped from Cora's hand and rang against the bowl. Tom regretted it at once, but the words were out. Seen him drinking at Bender's with Pike's foreman. The room seemed to contract around the lamplight. Outside, wind scraped dry branches against the house like fingernails. Eli set his cup down carefully. "You sure?" Tom nodded. "Mean as ever. Better shaved. Worse company." Cora bent to retrieve the spoon. When she straightened, her face had gone colorless but firm. "He didn't come back for me," she said. No one answered. Not because they believed it, because each of them feared the opposite. That fear arrived at dusk 2 evenings later in the shape of 4 riders. Pike came first. Virgil Bell rode beside him, cleaner than Eli remembered, wearing a black coat and a face improved only by distance. The third man was Deputy Sorrell, which told Eli all he needed about how far rot had spread. The fourth carried a satchel of papers and the look of a clerk too proud of his own penmanship. Cora stepped out onto the porch before Eli could stop her. Virgil looked her over slowly. "Well now, ain't you grown?" She held the doorframe, but not for support. "You lost the right to sound pleased." Pike laughed softly. "There's that Mercer plainness again." The clerk opened the satchel. "We are here to establish claim," he said, "on the person and inherited property of Miss Cora Bell, under authority of prior transfer and subsequent guardianship defect." "Speak English," Tom muttered from the yard. Pike obliged. "Your father says the original arrangement was temporary custody. Illegal, perhaps, but not void in spirit. More interestingly, your late mother held title to a spring parcel adjoining this ranch. That parcel passed, it seems, to you, Miss Bell, as your lawful surviving parent. Mr. Bell may act in your interest." Cora stared at him. "My mother had land." Virgil spread his hands. "I was keeping it till the right time." "The right time to drink it away?" she said. Pike's smile never moved. "Miss Bell, I am prepared to settle all confusion. Sign the spring over in satisfaction of Mr. Mercer's note to my bank, and this unpleasantness ends. Refuse, and I enforce the debt. Your father resumes authority, and the law will take a very great interest in where you have been living all these years." It was clever because it was filthy. Eli's note from 2 bad winters before. The spring. Cora's name. Her father's claim. Town gossip made formal. Eli stepped down off the porch. You want the water. Say that and save everybody time. Pike looked almost amused. I prefer a voluntary transfer. No. Pike's eyes shifted to Cora. Think carefully. A stubborn choice from you could cost every hand on this place a winter wage. What would you have done in her place? Would you sign to save the people who depended on you? Or would you risk everything rather than yield to a man who has never once earned the right to ask? Tell me that in the comments, because by now this choice ought to be sitting in your own chest. Virgil dismounted, boots sinking into the dry yard. You always were too proud, girl. Got that from your mother. She died hungry for it. Eli moved before Tom could. One stride. Two. He stopped so close Virgil's breath had nowhere to go but into his face. If you speak of her again, Eli said, quiet as a closing lid, make sure you've finished every other piece of business in this life first. Even Virgil heard the truth in that. Pike touched the brim of his hat. Tomorrow noon. At the stock sheds in town. Sign, pay, or surrender possession. Those are the options. They rode out with the last light on them, for black shapes crossing a pasture gone brittle as old bone. Inside, Cora stood very still at the table while Nora, who had arrived midway through the exchange and missed none of it, spread the papers Pike had left. He means to shame us in a haste, Nora said. Tom raked a hand through his beard. Can he do it? Nora's mouth thinned. Bad men do many things before good law wakes up. Cora looked from the papers to Eli. You knew nothing about my mother's land. No. If I sign, he takes the spring and your ranch. Yes. If I don't, he drags me back under his name. Not if I'm breathing. A strange, hurt little smile touched her mouth. That's not how law works. No, Eli said. It's how I do. Night came down hard. Nora took the papers and rode to town for records. Tom checked the rifles. Eli went to the barn because men with too much in them sometimes need the labor of hands to keep from breaking on the floor. Cora found him there near midnight, lantern low, smoke of old hay in the air. Were you ever going to tell me? She asked. Tell you what? That you nearly sent me away. He closed his eyes once. Who told you? Nobody. I found the mission receipt in the desk years ago. He leaned against the stall door. Juniper shifted behind him, her breath sweet with oats. I hitched the wagon, he said. Took you as far as town. And then I looked at a line of children waiting to be sent where they were convenient. And I decided convenience had already done enough damage in your life. She stared at the lantern flame. Why didn't you say? Didn't want you thinking I chose you late. Her head came up at that. Something opened in her face and scared him more than anger would have. Before either could speak again, a sound split the night, a shout from the yard, followed by the raw, hungry roar of fire. Tom burst through the barn door. South loft. They ran. Flame had already climbed the dry hay stacked above the calving stalls. Sparks flew wild on the wind. Horses screamed. One kicked the stall boards until they splintered. Smoke rolled low and black, carrying the greasy sting of burning tar and winter bedding. Get the animals out, Eli shouted. Cora yanked open the nearest stall and slapped the mare clear. Tom ran for the pump. Another shout sounded from the dark edge of the yard, the sharp, ugly laugh of men riding off fast. Pike had sent his answer early. Inside the barn a beam crashed. Eli plunged deeper through smoke toward the far stalls. Eli, Cora screamed. There was no answer but the crack of timbers and the panicked thunder of hooves. She took one breath, wrapped a wet sack over her mouth, and ran in after him. The heat hit like a wall. Sparks bit her cheeks. Juniper slammed backward against a half-fallen gate, eyes white and rolling. Beyond her, through the red churn of smoke, she saw Eli on one knee beneath a dropped crossbeam, one arm shielding a trapped gelding's head from flame as if the animal mattered still, as if everything living under that roof mattered still. That was where movement 3 of her life ended. Not with safety, not with certainty, but with the sight of the only father she had ever truly had disappearing inside fire, because leaving the helpless behind was a thing he did not know how to do. She cut Juniper loose first. Then she threw her shoulder against the beam with a strength born of terror and years of work. Teeth gritted so hard, she tasted blood. The wood shifted an inch. Eli shoved upward from beneath. Together they got enough room for him to crawl clear. The gelding bolted. The roof gave a sound like the sky tearing. They hit the yard as the south loft collapsed in a shower of sparks that lit the whole ranch as bright as noon. By dawn, the barn was half ruined, and the air tasted of wet ash and scorched pine. Eli's left arm was burned from wrist to elbow. Smoke had scraped his lungs raw. Tom's beard was singed short on one side. Cora's hands shook only when no one was looking. Nora arrived at first light with soot in the hem of her skirt from riding too hard and a leather packet clutched under her arm. "I found the record," she said. "Your mother, Esther Bell, filed a deed 6 months before she died. 40 acres around the spring, in trust to Cora Bell, beyond the control of her husband." Virgil had known. Pike had known. That was why they had come now, when drought made water dearer than mercy. Nora laid another paper beside it. And this? Eli petitioned for guardianship 12 years ago. The filing was never completed because Bell could not be found for service. Cora turned to Eli. He sat at the kitchen table stripped to his undershirt, while Nora dressed the burn with lard salve and linen. His face looked older in daylight, stripped by smoke and pain to the truest part of it. "You tried?" she asked. He stared at the table grain. "I wasn't aiming to own you. I just wanted the law to have less room to hurt you." "Why didn't you finish?" His voice came rough. "Because by the time I found where Bell had drifted, you were 12 and finally sleeping through the night, and I feared if I dragged it all back up you'd think I was making a claim instead of offering one." The room went still except for the tick of cooling stove iron. "I kept thinking," he said, each word pulled like wire through the throat, "that if I held steady long enough, you'd know on your own." Cora sat down across from him. Her hands were bandaged. His were blistered. For a moment, they looked like two people who had crossed the same country by different roads and arrived with matching weather on them. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I just never knew if I was allowed to say it first." He lifted his head. She swallowed. The words seemed to frighten her more than fire had. "Pa." Eli closed his eyes. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Just a man hit square in the oldest wound he had and healed there all at once. When he opened them, they shone. "Blood's a start," he said, voice barely more than breath. "Staying is the rest." Cora gave a broken laugh that turned, against her permission, into tears. He reached across the table with his unburned hand. She met him halfway. Their fingers closed hard enough to promise. "If this part of the story is moving you, you are exactly who we wrote it for." A like and a subscribe tells us to keep bringing you stories where the people worth loving do not get left behind. The tenderness did not make them safe. It made them dangerous. By mid-morning, Cora had washed her face, braided back her hair, and spread Nora's papers beside Eli's ledgers. "What do we have that Pike doesn't know we have?" she asked. Tom leaned in from the doorway. "Me." Nora almost smiled. "Also true." Cora tapped the books. "He thinks I'm only the name on a deed. He forgets I've been keeping accounts for 2 years. Her finger moved to a string of figures under Pike's banknote. "These interest marks are false. He charged the same quarter twice after the drought extension. And here," she turned another page, "these cattle tallies. He bought calves from widows for numbers that don't match the brand report filed at the sheds." Nora's brows lifted. "Cora, he steals small because men notice when you steal big," Cora said. "And because he thought nobody worth fearing would ever compare the papers." Eli watched her, pain forgotten. This was the girl who had once asked if orphanages wanted her. This was the woman the wrong men had mistaken for manageable. They rode into town at noon not like beggars going to plead, but like people bringing weather with them. The stock sheds were crowded. Drought had pulled every worried rancher in the county toward any rumor of sale, seizure, or cheap feed. Pike stood beside the loading pen in a dark coat, Virgil to one side, Deputy Sorrell to the other. Bender the saloon-keeper lingered near the scales, anxious in the shoulders. Mrs. Peavy stood outside her own caution with both hands clenched around her reticule. People sense spectacle. They always do. Pike saw the papers in Nora's hand and smiled anyway. "I admire punctuality." Cora dismounted before Eli could help her. "You won't admire what comes next." Pike's look sharpened. "Have you come to sign?" "No," she said. "I've come to read." That got a murmur. She climbed onto the edge of the weighing platform where everyone could see her. Wind tugged loose a strand of hair across her cheek. The board smelled of old manure, iron, hot dust, and frightened cattle. She held the deed high. "My mother left the spring to me beyond my father's reach." Mr. Pike knew it. Mr. Bell knew it. That is why they tried to force me instead of ask me. Virgil spat. You don't know what you're saying. She looked straight at him. That has been your favorite mistake since I was 9. A few men laughed. Short, shocked, real. Pike raised a hand. This can still be settled quietly. No, Cora said. Quiet is what men like you count on. Nora stepped up beside the platform and read the deed aloud in a voice that carried to the far corrals. Then she read Eli's old guardianship filing. Then Cora opened the ledgers. One by one she named the figures. The duplicated interest. The altered head counts. The brands bought cheap from widows and resold through Pike's foreman under fresh iron. She spoke without hurry, which made every word land harder. Numbers have a way of sounding like judgment when read by someone who understands them fully. Tom brought forward Mrs. Calder and old Mr. Ruiz and 2 other smallholders ruined by shortages they had blamed on weather. Each produced receipts. Each receipt matched a line in Cora's hand. Pike's smile finally left him. Deputy Sorrell stepped forward. This ain't proper venue. No, came a voice from the back, but it's proper hearing. Sheriff Hal Dobbins pushed through the crowd then, broad and unsmiling, a federal stock inspector at his shoulder. Pike turned, and for the first time there was something like uncertainty in him. You were meant to be in Casper, Pike said. I was, Dobbins answered. Then Miss Vickers sent a rider at dawn with enough written proof to make delay look corrupt. Pike's face went smooth again. Allegations. Arson too? Tom asked, holding up a broken lantern stamped with Pike Cattle Company's mark, found in the barn ashes at first light. The crowd changed shape around that. Not noise, exactly. More moral leaning. County by county, frontier justice often begins in posture before it ever reaches handcuffs. Virgil made his mistake then. Men like him always do it when they feel the ground leaving. He lunged for Cora's arm. Come here, girl. She moved before his fingers closed. Not back. Forward. She caught his wrist, turned with the weight of her body the way Eli had once taught her to turn a balking steer, and used his own momentum against him. Virgil stumbled off the platform and hit the dirt hard enough to grunt. The whole shed heard it. He tried to rise. She planted one boot on the paper he had dropped from his coat, the false guardianship document, half-signed and poorly forged. You sold me for a bottle, she said, clear enough for every man there to carry home to supper. Don't reach for me now like you misplaced something of value. No one helped him up. Pike, seeing the crowd had shifted beyond purchase, drew a pistol in one fast, ugly motion and backed toward his horse. The inspector shouted. Cattle bawled in the pens. For one sharp second, everything hung at the edge. Then Juniper, tied too near the rail, caught Pike's flung arm and panicked at the flash of metal. She reared, snapping the hitch. 2 steers slammed the gate. The lane erupted into noise and hoofbeats as a half-dozen cattle broke toward the open road. Men scattered. Pike tried to mount through the confusion. Cora was already moving. She seized Juniper's trailing rein, vaulted barehanded to the mare's back, and turned her into the running cattle instead of away. Dust blew up hot and bitter. Hoofs struck sparks off stone. She bent low over Juniper's neck, talking that same low, impossible calm she had used on the roan mare 12 years ago. You got no call to scare yourself to death, she told the mare. Not for him. Juniper steadied beneath her. Cora swung wide, cut off the lead steer, and turned the whole burst back toward the pen in a hard sweeping arc that left Pike exposed in the open lane with Sheriff Dobbins and the inspector closing from both sides. He raised the pistol. Eli stepped in front of Cora without thinking, burned-stiff arm useless, eyes flat as hammered iron. Try it, Eli said. Pike looked from Eli to the inspector to the crowd of men and women now openly against him. He saw, finally, what power looks like after it breaks. Not weakness, but witnesses. He dropped the gun. Virgil Bell was arrested beside him, yelling first at Pike, then at Cora, then at God, which in the end was only fair. Pike went to territorial court on charges of fraud, cattle theft, arson, and attempted coercion. The bank board stripped him to save itself. His North spread was sold piece by piece to cover restitution. Men who had once touched hats to him would not meet his eye in the chain wagon. Virgil got prison and liver sickness and the knowledge, more punishing than either, that the daughter he had traded away had stood in public and named him true. The practical realities came after, as they always do. The spring parcel remained Cora's by deed and was joined lawfully to Mercer Bend under her name and Eli's shared management. Pike's false interest charges were voided. Tom got his back wages with enough extra to finally roof the house he had been threatening to build for 15 years. Mrs. Calder kept her calves. Mr. Ruiz got his well line repaired. Mrs. Peavy began introducing Cora as Miss Mercerbell, though Mercer's the part that took. Even Reverend Sykes preached one Sunday on chosen family and sounded surprised by the conviction in his own voice. Eli healed slow. Burns have their own calendar. Cora ran the spring calving, hired hands, balanced accounts, and stood on the porch most evenings with the ledger in one hand and the horizon in the other, as if both belonged to her now. Because they did. When the county clerk asked what name should be entered on the new filing, she laid down her pen, looked at Eli, and said, Cora Mercer. He had to clear his throat twice before he could answer anything at all. A year later, on the first good rain after drought broke, children from 2 neighboring places came splashing through the yard while Juniper, old and vain and still beloved, flicked her tail under the cottonwoods. Eli sat on the porch rail with a tin cup of coffee cooling between his hands and watched Cora at the corral gate, showing a freckled little girl how to stand calm beside a nervous colt. Her voice carried back through the damp air, low and sure as ever. Some children are born into a name. Some are gathered into one by the hands that stay. Beyond them, the spring ran full and silver through the grass, and evening light lay across the pasture like a blessing that had finally learned the address. Next time, we'll tell the story of a deaf woman sent to a mountain ranch because her brothers were ashamed of her, and the scarred widower who discovered she could hear the one thing no one else in that valley ever did, the truth.